Have you ever imagined a military hero, someone who defends their country, wearing a dignified uniform and decorated with medals, could be the most ruthless villain Canada has ever known? This is the story of Russell Williams, a man who by day was respected, but by night became a nightmare for innocent young women. Russell Williams, a colonel in the Canadian Air Force, had a career that many admired. He had been a pilot flying important figures like the Queen of England and the President of Canada. Living in a luxurious house with his wife Elizabeth, a director of a healthcare fund, Russell had everything one could want: fame, power, and a happy family life. But there was something no one expected, that within this successful and esteemed man lay a dark secret, a monster waiting to be awakened. Russell was born in Bromsgrove, England, and later emigrated to Canada with his family when he was young. He grew up in an imperfect family. His parents divorced when Russell was just 6 years old, and his mother later remarried a neighbor. The lack of love from his father didn't stop Russell from becoming a successful person. He was a good student, getting into a prestigious university in Toronto, and later joining the Canadian military in 1987, at the age of 27, with a desire to contribute to national security. Russell was highly regarded by his superiors and was enrolled in Air Force Flight Training School. He served there for 2 years, from 1990 to 1991, as an instructor. At 31, Russell started working at Trenton Air Force Base near Ottawa, the capital of Canada, before becoming the base commander in 2009. In the following years, his career saw significant advancements. He held important positions in the Canadian Air Force and was frequently assigned to fly VIP aircraft carrying politicians and diplomatic officials, both domestic and international. Russell was considered a model military officer throughout his more than 20-year career. He even transported Queen Elizabeth II, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prime Minister of Canada, and many other officials on the Canadian Air Force VIP aircraft. With a distinguished career that many admired, Russell was also a lucky man, having married his wife Elizabeth, a woman working in the healthcare sector as the director of the Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation. This couple made anyone who looked at them envious, with a prosperous, complete, and happy life. After years of hard work, they bought a luxurious house in Ottawa in 2004, and not long after, they also bought a holiday home in the suburbs, just a few hours' drive away. They often spent time there on weekends or when they had free time, enjoying a peaceful life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As for Russell, he liked to take advantage of his days off and often went there alone without his wife, staying for a few days. But it was here that a perverted habit was formed and later developed into an unforgivable crime. In 2007, Russell's criminal activities started to take root. He secretly monitored young women living around his area, memorizing their routines when they went to work or returned home. Taking advantage of times when the house was empty, Russell would sneak inside to indulge in his perverted pleasures. But what were those perverted pleasures? As mentioned, Russell was a very powerful person, exuding the demeanor of a dignified, trustworthy man who had a lot to lose. To avoid risking his dream life, he had to be extremely careful with every action, making sure not to leave any trace, and most importantly, not getting caught. So he broke into young women's homes with the purpose of stealing women's underwear and adult toys. Russell's first victim was a 12-year-old girl. He sneaked in when no one was home, took a pair of pink panties, and began performing obscene acts with it. Even more insanely, Russell wore the panties himself, taking pictures and filming himself for 3 hours straight. Finally, he left, of course after carefully erasing all traces of his break-in to avoid detection. After the success of his first break-in, Russell continued his vile actions many more times, following the exact same pattern. He broke into many different homes, some of which he visited multiple times. Russell blatantly acted above the law. Gradually, the demon within him grew, devouring the morals of a man who had once been admired and respected. In November 2009, Russell drove from his home to the Belleville neighborhood, about a 30-minute drive away. He sat in his car, silently observing a house until the owner, a woman named Anne, left. Then he began to act. With his experience, Russell easily broke the lock to open the door and stepped inside. He went straight to Anne's bedroom on the second floor, rummaged everywhere, and eventually found what he was looking for: Anne's underwear and adult toys. Not only that, but Russell also accessed the victim's computer to steal the adult videos stored on it. Afterward, Russell left, feeling pleased. This time, he even left an anonymous letter to threaten her, something unprecedented. He typed on the computer, "Go ahead and call the police if you like. I'll publicly share all these embarrassing items with everyone, and let's see if you can still face the world after that." These words from Russell showed that his behavior was becoming bolder, not just trespassing and stealing, but turning into threats that could harm others physically, mentally, and even endanger their lives. Anne arrived home late at night after a fun outing with friends. She felt a chill when she saw her door had been broken. Summoning all her courage, Anne checked around the house for the intruder, but he had long since fled. When she reached her bedroom, she was stunned to find everything ransacked, strewn all over the place, and was even more horrified when she received a threat from the mysterious intruder. Anne didn't dare report to the police, but feeling unsafe, she went to stay at a friend's house that very night. However, Anne didn't know that this was also part of Russell's elaborate plan. Her fleeing made her home suddenly an easy target. Russell understood this psychology and casually returned, continuing his vile actions with her underwear. He took off his clothes, put on Anne's, and shamelessly posed in front of the mirror, filming and taking pictures for hours without worrying she might return unexpectedly. A few days later, when Anne returned home, it was all too late. Russell had gotten what he wanted, and Anne had no way of reporting him to anyone. Just a few days after the incident with Anne, it was Jane's turn. 21 years old, a single mother living with her son in Twix, the same neighborhood where Russell lived, to become his next unlucky victim. This time, Russell's crime escalated to a new level. He no longer needed to wait for people to leave their homes, but brazenly broke in even when people were inside. Russell successfully and silently broke in without making any noise to avoid being noticed by Jane. Since they lived very close to each other, he wore a mask to conceal his identity. Russell then quietly waited for his prey in the bedroom. At that moment, Jane had just put her son to sleep and returned to her room. As soon as she turned on the light, Jane was restrained by Russell, blindfolded, gagged, and threatened. "Do as I say. If you don't stay quiet, I'll kill you." Russell deliberately changed his voice so Jane wouldn't recognize it. Though terrified, Jane could only comply with his demands. She begged the criminal not to harm her young son. Of course, Russell was not there for the boy, but for Jane. He made her sit on a chair, tying her up with rope to make it easier to assault her. Russell also forced Jane to pose seductively, taking photos and videos for 3 hours, leaving the victim in panic and severe psychological trauma. Do you know where Russell went the next morning after committing such horrific acts? He returned to his highly esteemed image as a military colonel, donning his Air Force uniform and wearing his prestigious medals to attend a charity event for the intelligence agency. It's accurate to say that Russell was living 2 lives at once. By day, he was a respectable, elegant, and admired man, but at night, he shed that exterior to become a wolf, hunting his prey and committing unspeakable acts. Despite a seemingly pure outward appearance, Russell's soul had long been rotten. 13 days after the incident with Jane, a woman named Lori called the police to report her ordeal. She recounted that she had been attacked by an unknown man right in her own home. He punched Lori until she was unconscious, tied her to the sofa, stripped her clothes off, and began committing vile acts. Right after Lori's case, the police began connecting the dots. They concluded that Lori's case had many similarities with other recent assault reports. All incidents were carried out in the same manner, and it was highly likely that the same person was responsible. However, at that time, information about the culprit was still very vague. All Lori could provide to the police was voice. She suspected that the perpetrator might be Larry John, a nearby neighbor. Lori's suspicion caused Larry to endure severe criticism from those around him. People in the neighborhood could no longer look at him normally. Instead, they looked at him with anger and hatred. Wherever Larry went, he was isolated, cursed at, and some even physically attacked him. Larry, an innocent and unfortunate man, was suddenly falsely accused with no way to prove his innocence. Meanwhile, the real culprit was still at large, facing no punishment. Russell even gained the trust of the people living in Twix. With the rank of colonel, he made people feel reassured, without a shred of doubt. A sly fox like Russell had deceived everyone with his esteemed appearance, continuing to quietly commit vile acts. Even at work, in the Air Force unit he commanded, Russell continued to play the role of a dedicated leader, but deep down he had set his sights on another target, Mary, a 38-year-old female officer who was close to him. Mary was a member of the aircrew, having worked alongside Russell on numerous VIP flights. As her superior, Russell had access to all of Mary's personal information, from her phone number and home address to her relationships and work schedule. Nothing escaped his notice. When Russell decided to target Mary, he began sneaking into her house whenever she was away to indulge his perverted urges. One day in November 2009, Mary's life changed forever. She discovered that some of her underwear had inexplicably gone missing from her drawer. Despite thoroughly checking, Mary couldn't find them anywhere. This strange phenomenon made her uneasy, but not enough to contact the police. Mary thought they might have gotten misplaced or blown away by the wind while she was drying them outside. In late November, Mary had an overseas business trip according to her work schedule. Russell seized this opportunity to continue his dark plan, confident he wouldn't be discovered. However, fate had other plans. Mary unexpectedly took a leave of absence and stayed home. Russell arrived, only to find Mary still there. Instead of leaving to protect his secret, he audaciously hid in the basement, armed with a knife and ready to strike. The presence of this uninvited guest made Mary's cat uncomfortable, causing it to cry out continuously to alert its owner. The cat's cries caught Mary's attention. Curious, she went down to the basement to check, unaware that Russell was waiting with a weapon. The moment Mary turned on the light, she was caught off guard and was struck repeatedly on the head by Russell with a flashlight until she passed out. He then repeated his usual tactics, wrapping Mary's face with duct tape, tying her to a pole, and assaulting her, ignoring her desperate pleas. He stood by as Mary slowly died from blood loss without a shred of compassion. After she passed away, Russell quickly cleaned up the scene and left quietly, as mysteriously as he had arrived. A few hours later, Mary's boyfriend came by the house, unable to reach her. When he entered, he was horrified to find Mary brutally murdered, lying cold in the basement. He immediately reported the crime, and the police launched an investigation. However, all evidence had been meticulously erased by Russell, leaving no trace. After the crime, Russell acted as if nothing had happened. He even attended Mary's funeral, shedding tears for her and offering condolences to her family. His crocodile tears fooled everyone, successfully concealing his horrific crime. During this time, society was still investigating the culprit behind Mary's murder. Even an amateur criminal would know this was not the right time to act, let alone a sly fox like Russell. He lay low, returning to his daily life as a model man, always doing well at work and taking care of his small family. 2 months later, as Mary's case began to fade from people's minds, with fewer paying attention, Russell began his activities again. His next target was Jessica Lee, a 27-year-old administrative worker supporting school bus operations, living near the Twix area, Russell's territory. He could not forget the exhilaration he felt while tormenting his victims or performing perverse acts with their underwear. These sick pleasures drove him, and who better to satisfy his perverse desires than young women living alone? This time, Russell changed his method. He didn't attack his victim in her home, but decided to abduct Jessica and take her elsewhere. The morning after, on January 29, 2010, Jessica's company tried to contact her after noticing her unusual absence, but all efforts failed. They turned to Jessica's brother for help. Upon receiving the alert, her brother went to her house with the police. Jessica was nowhere to be found, and the house was in complete disarray, as if it had been broken into. Notably, Jessica's glasses and wallet were found on the path leading to the garage, signaling the seriousness of the incident. During the investigation, the police uncovered two crucial details. First, they found a man's footprints in the snow in the backyard. The cold weather had frozen these prints, making them clearly visible. Alongside them were Jessica's footprints. The second detail was a strange tire mark that certainly didn't belong to the typical type of vehicle usually seen in households. From here, the police concluded that Jessica had been watched and abducted by a stranger. A large-scale search was immediately launched in the town, with all forces mobilized. Time was critical. The longer the delay, the greater the risk to Jessica's life. Even Russell's unit participated in the search with the townspeople. He continued playing his perfect role, assuring everyone they would be kept safe with the military present. Russell even addressed the public. "Our unit will provide the necessary support. This place is protected by the Canadian Air Force. It is truly tragic to witness such a terrible event." Despite all the tireless efforts, Jessica was never found. While the search was ongoing, local police remained focused on the evidence collected at Jessica's house. Due to the uniqueness of the tire mark, they devised a plan to catch the culprit. The police blocked off all entrances and exits to the town, leaving only a single route along Route 37. Any vehicle passing through the checkpoint was required to stop for thorough inspection. On February 4, 2010, it wasn't difficult for the police to spot the vehicle, a Nissan Pathfinder SUV. Just by looking, they could see that the unique tire tread matched the prints found at Jessica's home. They exchanged astonished looks, silently celebrating that they had sprung their trap, but they refrained from making their realization too obvious to avoid alerting the suspect. But who was driving the vehicle? That was the most important question at that moment. When the window rolled down, they were stunned to recognize Colonel Russell Williams, a man they had always highly respected. Russell seemed unaware of what was happening, saying, "Could you please make it quick? My son is very sick, and I need to get home urgently to check on him." With this urgent plea, the police had no choice but to let Russell pass through, though they were filled with suspicion. It seemed the incident would pass without issue, but the police later discovered that Russell did not have a son, and everything he had said was a lie. On February 7, 2010, Russell was finally summoned for questioning. The interrogation was led by James Smith, a veteran criminal investigator from Ontario. James's involvement highlighted the severity of the case and was also due to Russell being a military colonel, meaning the responsibility could not be left to local police alone. Sitting opposite James in the interrogation room, Russell showed no signs of fear. In fact, he seemed very confident, chewing gum nonchalantly. However, when confronted about the similarity between his tire tread and the prints at Jessica's crime scene, Russell was immediately rendered speechless and quickly confessed. He spent the next 10 hours recounting to James how he committed his crimes and the perverse desires that had taken root in his soul, turning him into a murderer. Specifically, on the evening of January 28, 2010, Russell had secretly watched Jessica from outside her house while she exercised on a treadmill in the basement. At 1 a.m. on January 29th, he broke in while Jessica was sleeping, blindfolded and gagged her, and assaulted her for 3 hours. After satisfying his desires, Russell dragged Jessica into his car to take her to his house in Twix. At this point, she was still alive and begged for her life. Russell agreed, but only if she complied with his demands, which meant enduring his assaults for the next 21 hours. Once finished, Russell mercilessly killed Jessica without a hint of remorse. He discreetly stored her body in his garage, waiting for an opportune moment to take it to a forested area in Twix and bury it. Russell explained that he decided to confess because he wanted to feel less haunted by what he had done and, more importantly, to ease the burden on his beloved wife. After giving his testimony, he left a note for his wife, expressing regret and asking for forgiveness, also requesting that she continue to care for their beloved cat. Surprisingly, the case file was completed in less than 24 hours. Russell was arrested by police, and both his Twix and Ottawa homes were searched. There, the police found notes, photographs, and other evidence proving Williams was responsible for previous assaults. He had twice burned his collection of stolen underwear in an open field near Ottawa. However, the remaining evidence was enough to convict him, including photos of the bedrooms of twin 11-year-old girls and 87 stolen underwear sets from a teenage girl living alone. On his computer, the police also found numerous image files and videos documenting the assaults. They also noticed a file that contained detailed information about Russell's crimes. He had meticulously recorded the dates, times, victims, and items stolen, resembling a crime diary. In April 2010, Major John Williams began overseeing the case involving the depraved Air Force colonel. Many members of the military court involved in the case had heard rumors that their own homes were among those Russell Williams confessed to breaking into. That same month, Russell attempted to commit suicide in prison by stuffing paper into his throat to suffocate, but he failed. Following that, his cell was placed under special supervision. On July 23, 2010, Russell was brought to trial at the Belleville Superior Court in Ontario, Canada. On October 18, 2010, during the trial in Belleville, Colonel Russell Williams was found guilty of 2 murders, 2 sexual assaults, and 82 break-ins. The prosecution presented evidence, including numerous photos taken by Williams of his tortured victims, as well as himself wearing the victim's underwear in an extremely aroused state. Some of the photos featured cartoon characters, while others were close-ups of silk underwear in a state of arousal. The prosecution only described the footage that he filmed, as it was deemed too perverse and violent to show. On October 21, 2010, Russell was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, along with an additional 125 years for other offenses. Even after this sentence, Russell showed no remorse or apology for his victims. The court ordered the destruction of the defendant's SUV and all records created by him, as well as hundreds of stolen pieces of underwear. The court also fined Williams CAD $8,800, $100 for each offense, to be contributed to a victim support fund. When the media reported on Williams' case, many Canadian citizens called for his execution, a punishment that had been abolished in the country since 1976. Currently, Williams is incarcerated in a maximum security prison in Kingston, Ontario. However, he may still be eligible for parole in 2035 at the age of 72. Despite these horrific crimes, some analysts argue that Russell cannot be considered a serial killer, as per the standards of the US, FBI, and the Canadian Federal RCMP, which define a serial killer as having committed 3 or more murders in a distinct cycle. So what if Russell had not been caught after Jessica's case and remained free in society? He would undoubtedly have continued committing crimes and causing even more terror. Moreover, experts analyzing the case deemed it unprecedented. He was called a new kind of monster because no one who had been successful, had enviable social status, and honor had, in just 2 years, escalated his perverted tendencies to become a murderer. The wife of the perpetrator, Elizabeth, did not attend the trial, but her husband's crimes had increasingly burdened her life. Besides knowing that the man she had lived with for 20 years turned out to be a women's underwear thief, a murderer of 2, and an attacker of 2 others, Elizabeth also faced a lawsuit. One of the surviving victims filed a lawsuit against the former Colonel couple, demanding CAD $2.45 million in damages. This victim sought compensation not only for the crimes and mental harm caused by Williams, but also accused them of illegal property transfer to avoid future monetary judgments. Immediately after Russell's arrest, he and Elizabeth divided their assets. The cheaper house in Twix went to Williams, while Elizabeth agreed to pay her husband CAD $62,000 for his share of the more expensive house in the city. Following the incident, the Canadian military promptly stripped Russell Williams of his rank. In a special ceremony, 4 soldiers burned his uniform and medals. He was the first Canadian officer subjected to such a symbolic punishment. However, Russell still received his pension because Canadian law does not revoke this right. Since no similar case had ever occurred in Canada, there was no legal basis for suspending his pension. This truth became public knowledge through the media, sparking public outrage. Eventually, the government agreed to pass a federal bill to revoke pensions in such cases. Russell Williams' story forces us to seriously reconsider human morality. Not everyone who appears dignified and kind possesses a compassionate heart. Sometimes, it's just what the person wants to show us, while the hidden life behind it might be something unimaginable. What are your thoughts on this case? Share your opinions in the comments below so we can discuss together. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next exciting cases on the murder documentary Tony channel. Thank you, and see you in the next stories.